Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Episode 38 of Season 2. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. A bit of a shorter episode this week. I actually had a segment that I had recorded and was editing, and frankly, I did not like it. I'm actually having an internal debate about how to present content that I've already presented before. If you listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of successful podcasters repeat themselves, and they have so many episodes, they have so much content. I think it's actually a necessary part of the podcast environment. It's hard not to repeat yourself over and over again. In addition, as you have new listeners come to the podcast, you are introducing new content to them. They may not go back and listen to old episodes, familiarize themselves with the other ideas you've already presented. Yet when I hear myself doing it, and it seems to be the same old content, I don't really like it. And this was specific to politics, and it was specific to the fact that there is no difference between the political parties, and that is illustrated very clearly in this election cycle. You've got the Democrats focusing specifically on abortion. You've got the Republicans focusing specifically on crime and immigration. And it appears that neither of them wants to take on, in any meaningful way, inflation, which of course is the primary concern of most American voters. Why don't they want to take on inflation? Because neither one of them has any solutions on how to actually reduce inflation. The Democrats have no ideas. If they did, they would have employed them. The Republicans have no ideas. They don't even want to commit themselves to any type of position because they're confident that they're going to take over at least the House of Representatives, if not the Senate, and then be forced into a position where they have to actually implement some of those solutions. One of the reasons why Joe Biden is so unpopular is that he made a bunch of promises to progressive Democrats on the campaign trail, promises that he has not even really attempted, or only attempted within the last 6 months, to fulfill. So although it appears that there's a great disparity in the choices that you have at the voting booth this year, the reality is it's all window dressing. The reality is it's all identity politics. You're going to get the same thing no matter who you vote for. Extrapolate that over the course of 18 minutes, and that was the segment. I cut it. I'm not putting it in there. What is on tap for this week? Ego, awareness, and the automobile. Oh, it'll be an adventure. And there's a lot of pessimism, and a lot of people don't see this. Are we waking up from this technological nightmare that we live in today? Are more and more of us separating from our devices, from social media? Thank you for all my loyal listeners for the support that I've gotten through the course of the 2 years I've been doing this podcast. Please like, subscribe, write a review, distribute far and wide to all the peoples of the earth. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support.
Act 1, Ego, Awareness, and the Automobile.
I've talked about ego on this podcast and awareness, specifically self-awareness. The ego being this reactionary angel or devil, depending on the circumstance, depending on your outlook. The basic principle, though, is you don't often realize when you're in your ego. It's reactionary. Something happens, you immediately have a response. Before you know it, you are embroiled in some kind of circumstance. You often don't even realize how you got into it. This contributes to that feeling of a lack of control, that things are out of control. One of the places that I know that my ego is going to make an appearance, going to manifest most easily, it's the place where the worst me comes out. And that is behind the wheel of a car. I don't think I'm unique in this circumstance in my life, that the worst me that exists is the me behind the wheel of a car. I do have enough awareness at this point in my life to realize that's where I have to be most self-conscious. I have to be most present, because it's very easy for a narrative to begin, a story to begin, based on what the other drivers are doing. Oh, hold on a second. My ego has something to say. You people are all a bunch of fucking idiots and don't know what the hell you're doing on the road. Right pedal gas, left pedal brake. Fucking figure it out. It's binary. Thank you, ego. You can sit down now. See, that doesn't take much at all. If you extrapolate what you do in your ego while you're behind the wheel of a car, it really does help illuminate. It provides that awareness that you can carry to all the other aspects of your life. Think about how many times that someone has been in a lane that you want to get in. And perhaps that person is either half a car length ahead of you or half a car length behind you. And in your attempts to get over, you can't tell whether or not it'd be wiser to slow down or perhaps it'd be wiser to speed up. And in that measurement, in that analysis being performed by that supercomputer that is your brain, you start to notice that this person seems to conveniently be speeding up and slowing down, consistent with you speeding up or slowing down. And you think to yourself, this fucking asshole. Your ego is particularly vocal if you have your turn signal on, if you are actually signaling, hey, I want to get over. That narrative begins, that story begins. This prick isn't going to let me over. This prick is intentionally preventing me from changing lanes. What's really going on 99 out of 100 times? Hell, 999 out of 1,000 times. Hell, 9,999 times out of 10,000 times. The person in that other car isn't paying attention to you and may not even be paying that close attention to the road. No malicious intent, no malfeasance. There's a story in their head, they've got a narrative running, and they're in some sort of meditative road blindness where they're really not paying attention. People like to put this on their social media profiles. You see it in a lot of the guru, self-help, self-improvement world. It's all about spiritual teaching. It's all about the religious teaching. It's the concept that people generally aren't thinking about you at all. You are so concerned with what other people are doing, what other people are thinking, and very often it's your ego saying, it's all intentional, they're doing this to you on purpose. Generally, people are like us. They are self-absorbed. We are always focused on ourselves. We could give a damn, or more likely, we're just so focused on the inside, we have no idea what's going on the outside world. This is particularly true in an automobile, and this is particularly true when I'm driving. There's a grand design of assholes, and I just happen to always meet it, always be confronted by it. I'm always neck deep in it when I get into my car. The reality is, it's just a bunch of people trying to get from point A to point B, living their lives, often in the same vibration, thinking only of themselves and looking around, just as frustrated as I am. What to do? It's not enough to simply say, well, I'm aware, I have self-awareness, and that's going to carry the day. Here's something that you can try, dear listener. It's something that I often tell myself in an automobile because, again, worst me that exists is the one behind the wheel of a car. I tell myself this while operating the motorized vehicle, often before I start operating the motorized vehicle. Whatever happens, take that reaction that you feel and dial it down by half. Make a mental note and then go through the exercise in your head. Whatever the reaction that you're having, dial it down by 50%. Now, I know what you're saying, dear listener, because it's the first thing that I said when I heard about this technique. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. See? There it is. Our egos collectively make an appearance back on the podcast. And that's okay. Thank you so much for your contribution, ego. You can sit down again. Whatever your reaction in that automobile, that day, that night, whatever your reaction, mentally make a note, and then tell yourself in the moment, dial it down by 50%. Here's what's crazy when you actually start doing it. Instead of dialing it down 50%, you, this superconscious you, maybe the best, the eternal you, at least the most amiable, the most amicable part of your ego comes out, and you really don't get mad at all. You actually, in that flash, have the reaction. You tell yourself, dial it down 50%, and pretty much it goes away. You aren't even 50% frustrated. You aren't 50% angry. You aren't 50% profane. Let me give you an example of how I was able to employ this to great effect. I was in my motorized vehicle. I was operating it. I'm on a back street in a neighborhood. I'm about to hit a main thoroughfare, and it's probably 8:30 at night. I see the flash of what looks like bicycles riding along the road. No reflective tape, no flash, no nothing. It's like 1978 again, and I think to myself, legitimate. As I drive by these youngsters on their bicycles, I hear something hit the side of my car, and I look over and I see one of the bicyclists practically fall over and get back up and maintain the next revolution of the bicycle. And I think to myself, processing what I just saw and heard, I believe that kid just threw something at my car. I was tempted to turn around. I was tempted to roll down my window, to do all of these things. In that moment, I just said to myself, dial it down to half. What are you going to do? I didn't get upset. I had that flash. I had that moment. I continued on my journey. Did not let it affect the rest of the car ride. Did not let it affect the rest of the night. I was completely relaxed, and I was completely present. Sure enough, in the light of the next day, when I went to get into my car, there was something splattered across the side. Whether or not it was some sort of Play-Doh or cheese or clay, it was pretty nasty. Turns out, in fact, those kids really were channeling 1978. And I had the flash. I went right back to the place. And I thought to myself, dial it down 50%. And it just came through me. If that were you in, let's say, 1979 to 1986, would you have thrown something at some random car passing by? Was some man, was some woman, that night, the next morning, days later, scraping something off the side of an automobile because of you, because of some adolescent fit of power, a demonstration of rage and insecurity? Of course. Now, I wasn't whistling while I worked. I didn't scrape off that crud with a big smile on my face. I can say, though, with all sincerity, wasn't really that upset about it. A simple mental trick. When you get triggered, and where do we most get triggered? I know where I most get triggered. It's behind the wheel of a car. Take it down 50% and watch to see if you can even hold 50% of that reaction. If your ego can maintain a 50% presence. The ego is a very simple creature. It's either all or nothing. You heard me earlier in the podcast, through my ego, it's binary. It's either all or nothing. The ego gets to take over and gets to be in total control, or it strangely slips away while you are present, while you are aware. The car may not be the place for you, dear listener. I know it is for me. There's got to be some place, though, that you get triggered, and you know you get triggered. This is a great opportunity. It's not something to avoid. It's an opportunity. Given the society that we live in here in the United States, the fact that we do have so many roads, that we do have so many things that are far apart, that cars are such an essential part of our daily lives, I have the ultimate playground to exercise restraint and control and presence and awareness over my ego. And in doing so, you can then start letting your ego out when you want it to come out, rather than when it comes out based on triggers.
Act 2. Are we collectively awakening from the technology nightmare?
I've said it numerous times on this podcast. I'm very optimistic about this nation's future. This nation in particular. I'm optimistic about the planet Earth, the higher levels of consciousness that are being reached by people all around the world. I am particularly optimistic about the United States. No matter the challenge, there is no nation on earth that's better poised to take advantage of different types of opportunities that look like setbacks, that look like tragedies, that look like the end of the world. Very often, some of the most positive things that have happened to us in our lives have been things that in the moment, at the time, we thought were total tragedies, were setbacks, were losses. Look at inflation. Look at all the causes of inflation. Basically, over the course of the last 40 years, the United States, in this endless quest for lower and lower prices on consumer goods, exports all of its manufacturing overseas and has these long, complicated, and now expensive supply chains in order to get these goods from all over planet Earth. I don't believe in our elected officials. I don't believe in a lot of the programmatic or centralized planning by banks and governments. I do believe in the markets. I do believe that it's going to be more economical and more efficient to begin manufacturing things in this country, in the United States, than it is to have these long drawn-out supply chains with unreliable partners all over the world. Manufacturing will make a comeback in the United States. Fewer and fewer people are watching the mainstream or the legacy media. This bias that is not favored towards a Republican or a conservative, a Democrat or a liberal, this bias in favor of corporate media, of profit-driven media, a profit-driven media that works in service of power, whomever that power is. Not working as a check against power, working in service of that power for the almighty dollar. More and more people are conscious of it. More and more people are turned off by it, and more people are ignoring it and getting their information from alternative sources. As I've said numerous times, this is a net positive. That is the prime environment. This is the perfect catalyst for there being a higher level of understanding and consciousness in politics, in religion, in social issues throughout this country, if not throughout the world. What about technology? One of the things that we are fascinated by and yet deathly afraid of, this dystopian future where we're all dependent on technology. We've got some sort of electronic chip implanted in our heads. We've given away all of our information, all of our agency, all of our freedom via social media profiles, via these devices that we're so dependent on, that we're so infatuated with. Yet is it possible that in this level of despondency about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our fellow man, that we're actually evolving past this dependence on these technologies? Is it possible that even though things look so bleak, in 20, 30 years, we'll look at these phones and these computers and these tablets and all of this technology no different than we look at a television set, and God forbid, no different than we look at a radio? Let me elaborate. This came through me by way of two of the biggest names in technology over the course of the last 40 years, Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. There have been books written about Steve Jobs, documentaries. He has many hours of recordings, whether or not just audio or video, where he's talked about the evolution of Apple, of his vision for what Apple could be, and what was motivating him. Interestingly enough, as personable as Jobs came off when he was in front of a camera, when he was in front of an audience. If you read anything about him, he actually was very socially awkward when he had to deal with people on an interpersonal level, not relating to them as a boss to an employee, as one engineer to another. This is relating to other human beings on an interpersonal level, particularly when he was young. I believe you can go on the YouTube and find interviews where Jobs talked about being able to create devices for people who may not have the social graces that everyone else has, and yet they would still be able through these devices to explore and engage in very meaningful interpersonal communication because another person, maybe across the globe, they'd have one of those devices too. And through this medium, people from all over the world could connect, and it would bring people together. It would bring to what was an estranged world, it would bring this sense of togetherness. Those are pretty lofty goals, yes? It's hard to argue with that intention. It's hard to argue with that vision. Yet, as we know, dear listener, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And what has happened, what we can now see in the environment that was created by having these devices, having these mediums whereby people can actually communicate through the medium with anyone around the world, that medium allows us to simply express the thoughts that we have in our head out into the ether without having the benefit of true meaningful interaction with someone receiving that information. You can put the information out into the universe, and you don't necessarily have to look at someone else in the eye and gauge their reaction. Jobs, in effect, exported his social awkwardness out into the world through these devices. And you know I love paradoxes. You know I love irony, dear listener. The irony is, as Jobs got older and had to meet more and more people and was exposed to more and more different types of situations, he actually became more socially graceful. Rather than run from his social awkwardness, he had to run to it. He had to learn how to interact with a number of different types of people. And as he got older, he also mellowed. So he was more welcoming of the opportunity to meet people, to interact with people on a personal level, to look them eye to eye, to have a conversation, and to be able to read body language, to gauge energy, and to receive as much. Did his devices learn how to do that? Do these social mediums know how to do that? Are they learning how to do that? Of course not. That social awkwardness has only been magnified because people now, being able to communicate strictly through a device, don't have to learn social graces. They don't have to be put into awkward situations and by trial and error learn how to interact with one another. Learn how to read social cues. Learn their own social graces. It creates awkwardness. It creates isolation and loneliness. As I said when I was commenting on the metaverse, Mark Zuckerberg's wet dream, it's like having COVID lockdown 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a virtual world. You are electing to go into COVID lockdown. And that leads me to one Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse. News story came out this week. There was an investor call for Meta. One of the investors, a private equity group, I believe, and they own like 0.1% of Meta stock. That makes them an actually significant investor in Meta. As significant as Mark Zuckerberg? Of course not. But to have 0.1% of all of the Meta stock, that's a significant holding. This investor group, this private equity fund, was concerned that Meta, over the first 6 months of the year of our Lord, 2022, had lost close to $6 billion. That's billion, B, not million, $6 billion on the metaverse. The metaverse, which no one goes to, this virtual space which no one occupies. I'm not going to take a victory lap on this. As some of you might recall, I thought the metaverse was an atrocious idea, particularly in light of the fact that it was launched right as the COVID restrictions that faced planet Earth were lifting. You have an entire population of people in the United States, in other countries, complaining of the effects of the lockdown for such a significant period of time on their mental health. And here you have one of the largest social media companies launching what was, in effect, a COVID lockdown virtual world. The consumer didn't buy, dear listener. The consumer didn't buy. Is it possible that there's going to be some sort of change in the marketplace where people will start flooding to this metaverse? It's certainly possible, though I don't see it happening, because if it hasn't happened already, when will it? When will something that's not cool, that's really marketing to kids, become cool? Once it's not cool, it's not cool. Couple this with something that I don't understand either, the electronic dance music festival scene. The fact that, though, these festivals are all over this country, this planet, they're like a virus or a plague. And I could get into my ego and I could talk down about it. Let's flip that, though. What's the upside? If I look at it from below instead of above, these are human beings that are congregating with one another in public spaces to do something that creates a sense of community. They're not on their phone. They're not in the metaverse. They actually want physical human contact. And I think we have to be optimistic about that fact, about people perhaps not socializing the same way that we did when we were younger, maybe being more socially awkward later into their life, having to learn social graces in their 20s and 30s, where we learned them in our preteens and teens, yet learning them nonetheless. That the younger generations are doing it in a different way doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. I'm just happy that I'm seeing them do it. And in doing it, in realizing that all social media is a fake reality, a virtual reality that's nothing more than comparison. And as we all know, Theodore Roosevelt said it best, comparison is the thief of joy. Blurting out that chaotic cauldron that is your daily thought process onto social media, then trying to debate, if not argue, if not blather on with others. This is also the thief of joy. More and more people are withdrawing. The final nail in this technological coffin is something that I read, and this was anecdotal. I saw this article referenced on, I believe, a Joe Rogan podcast. You can Google it quickly, and I really don't care whether or not it's true. It does support something that I said earlier on this very podcast. A former FBI agent employed some of the services that are out there, these services that market that they can create a Twitter following, that they can create likes and followers on your behalf. He paid roughly $1,000, maybe less, and was able, in a fake account that he created, to garner close to 100,000 or in excess of 100,000 followers. Based on his experience in creating this fake account and with his background in law enforcement, he speculated that 80% of the profiles on Twitter are fake, are bots. They are accounts that you can actually pay companies to get likes, to promote things. They're just an army of bots that are waiting there to promote different things. And you can go through these mediums, these companies, or these individuals who've created all of these accounts and pay them to promote things. You can pay for followers. You can pay for likes. You can pay to have something trend. Now, I have stated for years that I believe at least 40% of all the accounts on Twitter are bots. Could it be as high as 80? Of course, because it's a black box. We'll never know. And Twitter will never admit it. They can't admit to the world that they've created this medium that people can manipulate so that nothing on there is legitimate. Nothing on there is real. Because if that's the case, the advertisers would get spooked. If, in fact, 80%, even 40% of the Twitter accounts are fake, are bots, I think the advertisers know that. It's not that they don't know and they would run from the medium. What they're worried about is having a commitment to that medium, paying all that money, and once all of the user base realizes it's all bullshit, they leave. Advertisers want the guarantee of eyeballs. If, in fact, they're paying all of this money, they don't care that a bunch of profiles are fake and can actually create from the targeted, the manipulated use of algorithms, things that benefit them to trend. Advertisers just don't want you to know that because you will leave and they want your captive attention. This is a good thing, dear listener. These types of revelations about what Twitter actually is, this is a good thing. People will turn away from it. People will stop paying attention. Lo and behold, another article comes out this week about these Twitter super users, the people that tweet the most. And it noted that of the top 10% of users that tweet, their presence on the medium had dropped significantly. Not only do I believe that people realize that Twitter is all bullshit, but those real people that have actually been using Twitter as a medium to communicate are also realizing it's all bullshit. It's not just a cesspool, it's all a lie. Many of the people that they thought were following them, that they thought they were communicating to, if you have 500,000 followers on Twitter and 80% of the Twitter user base is bots, you've got 100,000 followers. You were putting all of this energy into this false narrative. What user base continues to operate in Twitter as actively as it always has? It's the same as it's been for the last 40 years in computers. It's gaming and it's porn. It isn't that people are going to think that Twitter's no longer cool. They're going to think it's all nonsense, and I believe it's going to go the way of MySpace. Can Elon Musk save that? Can Elon Musk turn it around? If anyone can, it's probably him. It will require significant transparency. Once you don't believe in the medium anymore, you don't believe that any of the people that you've been corresponding with, that you've been interacting with, that you've been even arguing with are real people, you'll leave. People are waking up, and it's a good thing. I am optimistic. Now, do I believe that tens, if not hundreds of millions of people are going to be caught up in this higher level of consciousness and come to these realizations and walk away from these things, these mediums, these technological devices that are causing them so much hardship and discomfort and pain and disillusionment? No, I do not. McDonald's still exists. Walmart still exists. The thing is, dear listener, you don't need hundreds of millions of people. You've heard this, dear listener, in a religious or spiritual context, and I know you've heard it in a scientific context. Darkness permeates. It only takes a little bit of light to completely shatter all of that darkness. We don't need millions or billions. Not everyone is going to wake up at the same time. But people are waking up, dear listener. People are waking up. And it isn't success or bounty or plenty that is going to be the catalyst for that awakening. It's this. It's the discontent with the technology. It's the realization that it's all a virtual bullshit world. Let us be sympathetic as we wake up to those that are still asleep. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.